Hello everybody, my name is Spoons Rattling, and welcome to a short video on a sort of guide on how to make your own custom Space Marine chapter, or really color scheme for any faction. I'm just using Space Marines, as they are the most popular faction, and they're the poster boys of the universe, I'm sure you understand. Let's get right into it. So, a quick disclaimer before we get into the video, that painting 40k is obviously a creative endeavor and a huge creative opportunity. Don't feel pigeonholed into following guidelines or video guides, as most colors and color combos can be made to look good. This is more just a guide to painting custom color schemes if you're low on ideas, and rules of thumbs whenever making color schemes, even in the most wild of cases. Let's get into it. So, I'd say the biggest decision when making your own custom color scheme, and in this case, Space Marine chapter, is the picking your colors. So I've taken three colors here, and the first one is what I'd consider a traditionally bad type of combo, which is colors that are too close to each other and too dark. It creates a very muddy look. Now, these colors can be made to look good using the following steps, but for now we're going to sort of disregard this color combo. Even though there is a famous chapter that uses it, the Minotaurs, I'd say they actually introduced the step we're going to introduce next into their color scheme to make it more interesting. If you need more inspiration, I'd look at famous characters or a color wheel. We can see in the second example, the colors are complementary to one another, but are so bright they clash in a strange way, making it a little hard to look at, and it would need some extremely harsh shading to make it work properly. And then our final step with orange and blue, the colors are complementary but are more dull, so I think we're going to take this color scheme and work from there. This is generally a good way to pick your color scheme, is two complementary but still contrasting colors. Using any colors, really. They can be metallic or flat. In this case, we're using flat colors. So the concept of discord is something I learned about a while ago when I was painting. It's adding more contrast without making things too hard to look at, like we saw with the red and bright blue. So it can be achieved by darkening one color and brightening another. You can use white or black or yellow and dark blue. Of course, in this situation, we can't really do that, but so we're going to tackle the colors themselves with a very simple step by adding a dark and a light to your color scheme. This will increase contrast and general visual interest. As you can see here, the dull orange and somewhat sort of medium blue become a very nice, bright, almost refreshing, I guess is the first word that came to mind, orange, and a very deep, dark blue that contrasts more and, again, introduces more color, more color variance in the model. I'd say this is a step you can use for almost any color scheme. If you're making one up, it's a good idea to introduce this idea of discord to increase the visual interest on your paint scheme and on your models. From here, we're going to move on to the next step. And this is getting more into the Space Marine specifics, but in ways to apply it. Don't just think you have to apply it the exact same way, say, the Ultramarines do, where it's all one color and then you have a couple splotches of other colors. The Space Marines take a lot of inspiration from old school knights, as I think is pretty obvious given their attitude and appearance of giant armor. So, looking at their old heraldry, we can see a few different sort of themes, and I made a few options here using the old bolter and chainsword Space Marine paint scheme maker. You can see the sort of quartered off color scheme on the bottom left. That is actually, I think, a very fun type of color scheme. There's a few specific chapters that use it. I believe it's the Howling Griffins. They're red and yellow, and they look quite striking. Then next we have a slightly more traditional combo, I'd say, of having most of the armor be one color, and then having spots like the trim of the shoulder pads, the knee pads, and the elbow pads also taking on that color, and a little bit of detail in the power pack. I'd say that's the most sort of by-the-books color scheme application you can do for Space Marines. Next up, we have a slightly different one where it is focusing one color into a certain area, and here it's the power pack and the helmet. You can sort of, I draw a parallel to the Crimson Fists, actually, but instead of it being their helmets and power packs, they obviously focus the crimson on their fists, as their name would imply. And then we have the classic split design, or two-face design, as I like to call it sometimes. This is a very classic sort of knight look, same with the quartered off sections. And I actually really like this one. One of my favorite chapters visually, the Omega Marines, actually use this style but with black and white. I'd say that really any of these can work, and you can even go further than that. Say for the third one, the helmet power pack, you could also make, say, the shoulder pads, or you could make the forearms and the shins out of shins. The lower half of their legs also orange. Regardless, if you're looking for inspiration, just go look at some old heraldry from old knights and medieval times in general. I'd say Space Marines are one of the best applications of this because of their huge variety. You can really get away with almost any way of applying your colors, but I do recommend introducing a lot of that secondary color, which is actually very easy to do on Mark 7, as we see here, and on the Mark 10 Primaris Marines, but it's a little harder to do on armors like Mark 6, as they don't have like knee pads and stuff like that. Regardless, that's more getting into model choice, and that's not really what we're talking about here. It's mainly just the colors and how you could apply them. So in terms of extra details, Space Marines generally fall into two categories, that being non-codex and codex chapters. And if you collect for a long time, or you just want to increase visual variety and make sort of each of your units have each unit that fits into a different role have a slightly more unique appearance, you can start to introduce the idea of company markers, or if you're non-codex, something like the Space Wolves, I believe they're called Great Companies, like Ragnar Blackmane and Logan Grimnar. But that's aside the point. I decided to make some little sort of company and role colors here. You can see the veteran in the first company, they're using a sort of bright palish minty green for the helmet, which actually I kind of really like the look of. At first I was a little iffy on it, but it's grown on me. And then for heavy support we're using purple, and I did make this knee pad purple. That's just another option of something you can do. A lot of say the Dark Angels, their company markings are on their knee pads, but this is taking a little more inspiration from the Blood Angels, which use different helmet colors to mainly denote their place in the chapter. And then for assault squads, which would also apply to things like bikes and land speeders, I decided to go for a bright blue helmet. All of these, I'd say, are colors that fit in, but are also nicely contrasting with the rest of the armor to make it easy to read. So say you're playing a huge game, you can easily tell if like your foot-bound soldiers are heavy support, or their veterans, or their assault units, or fast attack units, if you want to go by old force organization chart jargon. But this is really just another spot where you can add in more creativity and more visual interest to your army, and I'd highly recommend doing it, as it can look quite interesting to have your different wings of your army function and have different colors to denote that, while still keeping the main color scheme the same. So I'd say the hardest part of this is choosing a name, and this mainly applies for Space Marines, but you can apply this to most things, but you're just going to want to change out where you draw the names from. And coming up with a snappy name is hard, obviously. And for successor chapters, you generally want to look at the patterns. You'll see a lot of patterns of like materials, colors, and sometimes actions, followed by an animal or like a warrior or a beast or something like that. Again, as I mentioned earlier, the Howling Griffins, or the White Templars, or the Iron Knights. But a lot of them do break this convention with simple names like the Minotaurs, or using two categories twice instead of once each, like the Hawk Lords or the Omega Marines, as I mentioned earlier. Generally, in naming Space Marine chapters, use words for colors, actions, or verbs, materials, animals, monsters, weapons, and warriors. And some sort of setup like that, whether it's one word, two words, and of course you can throw in a lot of the Imperium jargon, again, emperors or Imperiums, and also don't be afraid to throw in things like of and the. And I decided to name these orange and blue Marines the Knights of the Relentless, as that kind of combines almost everything except color. It includes some prepositions, it includes warriors, and a verb. Or I think it's technically an adjective, but you get what I mean. And we'll just say they're a fleet-based chapter of unknown founding. And then another hard part for custom Space Marines, and really any custom force, is having a sort of a recognizable logo. And freehanding it is very hard. but a very valid option. And but a lot of us who aren't quite as good as freehanding will want to use transfers. And while Space Marines and Chaos Space Marines have a lot of options, they don't have everything. However, with all those options, you can actually sort of fill in any gaps that you're looking for. I've seen people put down a transfer and then varnish it and then paint over it using it as sort of like a stencil almost. What you're going to want to do is cut the transfer to shape and fill in the gaps with the right color. And I put together this one very simply. I just using the Dark Angels as a base. I just cut the wings off, and then we've got a sword. Flip it upside down, and it fits their chapter pretty well, I'd say. You could do this with almost anyone. Actually, staying with the Dark Angels, you could sort of cut off a lot of the sword and maybe turn it into like a hooded figure or something like that. It just takes a little bit of creativity, but don't be afraid to use transfers to practice your freehanding, as they'll often be quite forgiving. Just make sure you varnish them before you apply any paint over them. And from there, we're done. That's the hardest bits, I'd say. You just want to fill in some lore and fluff about your chapter, and you've got nothing to a fully fledged Space Marine chapter with iconography and its own striking color scheme. Make sure to comment below your own custom chapters you've made and any other tips you might have for making custom factions for 40k. I've been Spoons Rattling. I hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you all next time.